what we're going to see here, and I can say very confidently, is that in the next few years, most taxis are going to be servicing Uber referred trips everywhere.
Interesting. Okay.
Uber has won that battle of demand. I mean, they're the number one way you book a vehicle for hire still today. So
Yeah.
losing all that business to rideshare, but now coming full circle where that business is now back to the taxi industry is going to create a kind of rebound in regulated taxi services.
Hansu Kim is a longtime San Francisco political consultant with over 20 years of experience in transportation policy and legislation. In 2011, he purchased DeSoto Cab, the city's oldest taxi company, and rebranded it as Flywheel Taxi to promote the Flywheel booking platform, a move that helped the fleet triple in size. He's now chairman of Flywheel Technologies, and Hansu led the company's 2017 acquisition of the Flywheel software platform, and in 2022 oversaw its partnership with Uber to connect Uber riders with taxis nationwide. Hansu, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Great to be on the show again, Harry. Good to see you.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a few years since you were last on the Rideshare Guy podcast, and today we're going to dive into, sort of get an update, an overview of the taxi industry, dive into your partnership with Uber, and talk a little AVs. So I'm excited to get your perspective on AVs. I'm going to save the best for last, but why don't we start with, give me sort of the current state of Flywheel and the taxi industry more broadly. Where are we at?
For sure. First, as you know, we talked about this before, this partnership with rideshare and taxis really now have really taken hold. And now it's about really expanding it and scaling it throughout the United States and actually globally. But let me just take exactly, what has happened, just as a quick recap. I'm a regular listener. I think those that listen to you would really like a clearer understanding of why the two companies have partnered, the two industries have partners, and why it's so mutually beneficial. So first, let me just say that the partnership between rideshare and taxis has been amazing. It has actually exceeded our expectations in terms of what we thought would happen. What's very unique about the way that Uber and Flywheel has partnered, and that's our partner, Uber is based in San Francisco, Flywheel is primarily based in San Francisco, is basically to get their rides to be serviced by taxis if a taxi is closer and more convenient. But the unique aspect of the way we partnered is the way that it is now scaling throughout the United States, which is the way Uber provides rides over to taxis. We had to get the rules changed within the taxi regulatory environment to bring that pricing over as is, so that the consumer does not have a difference in terms of price or user experience when they book through Uber and they're not matched to a taxi. That aspect is really unique about the partnership. And now the regulatory bodies within the taxi world are kind of embracing this. They're kind of understanding that, okay, this is a Uber passenger that's referred over to a taxi. They've agreed to this price. So if it's surge price or whatever it is, if the taxi accepts it, it'll be a taxi ride.
So from a product perspective, a consumer, they normally call an UberX and they normally get an UberX, right? Someone like me, Harry, the casual driver. And you're saying now in San Francisco with your partnership, sometimes they actually get a taxi. Is that if they've opted in, or is it just sort of shows up if or when, kind of all the same conditions, or the experience will be a little better from an ETA perspective?
It is now automatically matched to a taxi if it's closer. So Of course, the Uber passenger is always in control. They can decline that and get and not accept a taxi. But we're finding a 99% of the passengers are fine with a taxi as long as the price is the same.
Yeah.
They have the same, picture of the driver, the vehicle coming to them. So it's exactly the same as used to. This is a taxi now that you're matched with. Why this is so brilliant for Uber, it's not just about supply and being able to take advantage of full-time commercial taxis with drivers that are working full-time, that are experienced and trained, that can service their world-leading demand. But it's really the way that we partner from a regulatory standpoint is that when that ride is matched to a taxi and that app-to-app connection happens between Uber and Flywheel, it is now a Flywheel ride. So even though the experience and price is the same, that means the taxi insurance now covers the ride as a taxi ride. That means the driver was never hired by Uber in the sense that employification challenges that Uber may have. And there's limited liability. So for Uber, for them to refer their ride to be serviced by a taxi, they still determine the price. They still take the fee out of that ride, But now a lot of those costs are kind of offloaded when a taxi completes the ride.
So it's interesting because 11 years ago, Uber came onto the scene. Taxis and Ubers did not like each other, right? And I would say that maybe for about 7, 8 years, until maybe about 3 years ago, they didn't like each other. You obviously have been very, not obviously, but you've been very forward thinking, adopting technology for the taxi industry, partnering with Uber. Is that kind of where we're at in the taxi Uber relationship? Are taxis, companies across the nation embracing Uber now as sort of a lead gen and demand opportunity?
Look, as a big taxi fleet owner, I have been known to be very critical of the taxi industry.
Mhm.
And even still today, the taxi industry as a whole, I still categorize as dinosaurs. The taxi industry really has to adopt these technologies, customer service, in a way that they did not do for many years. The reason Uber and Lyft and these rideshare companies succeeded is they service the public in a way taxis could not. And so instead of the taxi industry really embracing e-hailing on
Mhm.
smartphone booking and making that service a part of the platform for the taxi industry, they fought it.
Yeah.
Now it's a completely different story, Harry. Now that they realize that having these technologies and embracing what the public wants and partnering with rideshare to get access to that demand is its future.
Yeah.
So what we're going to see here, and I can say very confidently, is that in the next few years, most taxis are going to be servicing Uber referred trips everywhere.
Interesting. Got it.
Uber has won that battle of demand. I mean, they're the number one way you book a vehicle for hire still today. So
Yeah.
losing all that business to rideshare, but now coming full circle where that business is now back to the taxi industry is going to create a kind of rebound in
Yeah.
regulated taxi services.
Well, and you're right, the taxis did lose some business, but Uber also expanded the market
Oh,
by
yes.
maybe 10x. I mean, I don't know the numbers in San Francisco, but in New York City, right, there were 13,000 taxi medallions. Now there's over 100,000 Uber and Lyft vehicles. I mean, that's a almost a 10x right there in the number of vehicle increase. So I think there's probably a good argument to be made that they've, took some market share, maybe even a lot, but now are expanding and kind of seems like taxis have to embrace. So I believe Uber is also partnered with Curb in New York City. Are other taxi operators kind of embracing this partnership model?
For the first time where there was resistance, there is now acceptance. So many of the
Mhm.
technology partners are looking to work with Uber now once they realize that demand is something that is going to, again, rebound the taxi industry. And you're exactly correct. Uber has not only created a lot more demand along with taking demand away from taxis, they've created a lot more rides. So the phenomenon right now is now that we have access to all of Uber's demand back to taxis,
Yeah.
there's more business than there's ever been, and that's very unusual to say. But right now, my taxi fleet in San Francisco,
Mhm.
the drivers are doing very well, being able to access all of Uber's demand plus traditional taxi demand. And San Francisco, although recovering right now, it was at a low point over the last few years in terms of tourism and so forth. I'm sure people know about that. Is now back on the upswing. But
Mm.
even with that low tourism, are there are there are an enormous amount of rides that
Yeah.
taxis now have access to that would not have been there without Uber.
Got it. So let's quantify it a bit if we can. Maybe you can talk about the size of your fleet in San Francisco, any numbers you want to share around, maybe the percent breakdown that you're getting from traditional sources or, Uber versus, traditional. Because I mean, like you said, you can kind of now get demand from Uber, plus you can get your sort of normal, app, right? You Flywheel has their own app in San Francisco, street hailing to airport trips, at the queue up. So, maybe broadly, I don't know, how much percent Uber, how much from your regular sources?
So I would say at least 50% of all the rides now taxi drivers are doing in San Francisco are coming from Uber's referrals.
Oh,
So
wow.
we're talking about half the rides now are there. And then the other half is traditional taxi business, our own app that people still can use,
Yeah.
as well as flags, airport fares, those type of things. What is very interesting though is now that taxis can service Uber demand, those rides are going to taxis as well as Uber X's.
Right.
So what has happened is that from a regulatory standpoint or a city perspective,
Mhm.
we are now maximizing the efficiency of all the commercial vehicles for hire. And in a
Mhm.
strange way, years ago, there was a phenomenon where you had hundreds of Ubers coming in the evening, right?
Mhm.
And basically working the city, creating a lot of congestion and pollution and so forth. that is really diminished quite a bit, even though the ridership is now still very strong because you have now full-time taxis 24/7 servicing a lot of that demand.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing I want to point out to your viewers here is of another very interesting phenomenon has happened. In San Francisco, many of the Uber drivers are now getting cab driver's licenses
Hmm.
and looking to drive a taxi. Part of that is because they realize, look, the demand I'm getting in my personal car, I can now get also as a taxi. What
Mhm.
Uber has done is it's a slightly difference in terms of their take rate, what they charge as a fee
Yeah.
for when you're driving your personal car and when that ride goes to a taxi. So the fees are less than it would be driving an Uber X. So we are seeing a lot of Uber drivers looking to now get a professional cab driver's license, which is an interesting
Interesting.
phenomenon. Yeah.
So in May of 2020, we had our top contributor, Jay Crater, signed up for the rideshare guy, signed up to drive a taxi with Flywheel. And we wrote a bunch of articles and, did a bunch of videos. And I think it seems like it might be coming full circle. It's interesting, some of the benefits that you're listing off, with drivers obviously kind of going to taxis. And, I know we've interviewed a couple fleet owners from Alto and Tower in the past that are doing this W-2 model with Uber. And I know the thing that they said is that there's big insurance savings for Uber. And so if they can save on insurance, they can kind of spread the wealth a little bit there. Is that kind of where, you guys are finding better economics, or is it better drivers or safer? Where's the sort of benefit for everyone in this type of partnership?
So I would say the main driver here is always the economics. If the
Hmm.
driver is going to make more money, they're going to basically gravitate to those services that are making them the most money.
Yeah.
In this case here, if you are able to access Uber's demand driving a taxi plus taxi demand,
Mhm.
and those Uber rides, again, just reiterating, when those rides go over to a taxi, Uber can take less of a rate from it because they're not having to insure that
Right.
vehicle. They have
Their
ability
take
to
rate
notificate.
can be
Right,
lower.
exactly. And it has been lower.
Mhm.
So these Uber drivers are realizing, wait a second, maybe I should get a cab driver's license and consider driving a taxi. And to give you an idea how big that has gotten since the pandemic, we know people still recovering from the pandemic, especially,
Mhm.
for the vehicle for a hire industry. I put every one of my taxis back on the road. Flywheel
How many is
Taxis
that
getting close. So we're getting close to 400 vehicles now, 400 taxis in my own
in
fleet
SF?
in SF. And so it gives you an idea. And all the other taxi companies are using the Flywheel platform, my own
Mm.
competitors, to access this Uber demand. So
Got it.
what's the driving force of this adoption is not that the taxi industry is all of a sudden realize, oh, I better adopt this technology. It's if
Mhm.
they do not access the demand that Uber can provide through technology, they're not going to be competitive. So that's
Gotcha.
what we've actually seen here.
Yeah, and I think you also brought up a good but sometimes confusing point that I know that Flywheel, your taxi fleet is branded as Flywheel, but there's also Flywheel, the software provider, the technology, and other taxi fleets. Your competitors can and sound like do use that technology platform, so they're able to tap into this Uber demand if they use the Flywheel app, right?
Yeah, let me just explain that because there are two complete separate companies.
Hmm.
So the taxi company and fleet, which I own, was originally a DeSoto Cab Company, which
Right.
is, I think, the oldest continuously operating taxi company in the state of California. Since 1928, it's been operating.
Mhm.
You can imagine that when I decided to rebrand the fleet Flywheel and rename it and change the colors, it was an iconic blue color for the old DeSoto, and now changing it red to promote
Yeah.
the colors of the application, the drivers really rebelled against that. But
Hmm.
this was at the height of the competition of rideshare, where the taxi industry was kind of being decimated.
Yeah.
And so the two other big companies in San Francisco at the time, Yellow Cab and Luxor Cab, Yellow Cab went out of business. Luxor is no longer. And because we rebranded and we promoted this technology and said, hey, taxis have this technology too,
Hmm.
we got a lot of volume of business, and that saved the company and actually grew the company. So if there's anything that it did right is to
Yeah.
basically take that chance and embrace that technology early. But let me tell you, drivers were so upset. And then when they heard that we partnered with Uber to bring Uber rides over to, oh my God, I could just play the message to you on my
Your taxi
phone of
drivers were not happy.
oh, you traitor, you sold out to
Mhm.
Uber, right? But I knew that the way we partnered with Uber, and this is important to understand, is when that ride comes over to the taxi,
Mhm.
that taxi driver has complete choice to be able to take that ride or not. So
Got it.
they get to see where that ride is going, how much they're going to earn. If they don't want it, they don't have to take it, no consequence.
Your
And
taxi drivers in San Francisco, are they 1099
no, they're all
employees?
I'm sorry. They are all 1099. They're all independent
Got it.
contractors.
Got it. So typically what's the model for your drivers? They pay a weekly rental fee and then everything that they earn, they keep?
The best way to explain this, because it's very confusing for folks, is the standard model for the taxi industry is really two things. One
Mhm.
is taxi companies essentially rent out taxis to licensed cab drivers. So it's sort of like an Avis or Hertz, but
Yeah.
to licensed taxi drivers. So it's a leasing business, right?
Got
In that sense. So you're making rents on renting out a taxi to licensed taxi drivers. That's one aspect of the business. The other is a lot of taxi drivers are what's called owner operators. They
Mhm.
own their own vehicle. They have their own so-called medallion or taxi permit, and they have to join a color scheme with certain colors and services. And so those owner operators use Flywheel for its services, and they
Got it.
pay us a monthly fee for services like lower insurance rates,
Mm.
dispatch rides, those type of things. So those are the two models that are pretty much predominant in the taxi industry, pretty much throughout the United States.
Yeah.
And that's how the taxi industry works.
So do your drivers, do they make more money on taxi rides or Uber rides?
Oh, another great question, Harry. A few years ago, as you know, those
I'm
Uber
just getting
rides
warmed
were,
up, Hansu, don't worry.
I love it. As you know, the prices of the Uber rides was considerably lower than taxis a few years ago.
Yep.
Those rides have steadily increased and they're very close now. So they're
Mm.
on par. So I would say that there are still at times low price rides from Uber. And as a general rule, I think longer rides tend to be less expensive than taxis by a little bit.
Mhm.
But don't forget Uber surge prices. All ride
Yeah.
shares are surge uses an algorithm. So at other times the pricing is better. On average, we're finding, just to be clear, we have all the
Mhm.
data. It is so close, we're finding it's really within 10%,
Yeah.
really on
Interesting.
average. So it's really on par now, the pricing between rideshare and taxi.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the complaints we've heard from drivers over the past few years, well, from riders, Uber riders, is that, the prices have gone way up over the past few years. There's a lot of data that backs this up, or you can just go call an Uber ride. It's a lot more expensive than it used to be, right? And then what we hear from drivers, though, is that actually, the take rate that Uber takes on an individual driver basis has also gone up. And so what does that mean? Uber's charging more, paying drivers less. They're making a lot more money, which is also reflected in their earnings and their stock price. They're making a lot of money. It's good to be an Uber investor these days. But I think one thing that's always been challenging for individual drivers, it's hard to kind of negotiate that individual take rate. You sort of have to take what you can get. Whereas I imagine when you have a fleet of 300 or 400 cars, you can be more aggressive. You can say, hey, I could go to Lyft, or hey, Uber, we've got great drivers. We've got great insurance. Here's the sort of average take rate. Is that kind of, I guess, is that how it plays out in real life?
Harry, I have to tell you that Uber and Flywheel pioneered. I say we pioneered this because when we first
Hmm.
partnered with Uber, we had to get these rules changed. And what we call this kind of model where the ride comes over priced as is,
Hmm.
but it's a taxi ride, we call this the coalesced supply model. And that
You call
model
it the what?
really, the coalesced supply model. So
Coalesced. Got
taxis,
it.
yeah, and UberX sort of the same price, same everything. And so that the most important thing is the consumer does not see a price difference or
Mhm. Right.
a service difference, right? So we had to test this out in a pilot. We had to test out with Uber employees first.
Hmm.
And it was so brilliant. Now it is just, again, you are an Uber user, visitor, local in San Francisco. You book a ride to UberX, you're just as likely picked up by a taxi. So
Yeah.
that model is the way it's going to go. But I will tell you, Harry, guess what? Guess who now is knocking on the door, want to utilize taxi infrastructure is Lyft,
Mhm.
is the food delivery companies. So all these third parties that everyone thought, I mean, my own friends, Harry, told me,
Mhm.
"Hey, we're so sorry, man, that you own a taxi company. You guys are a Blockbuster. Uber is Netflix. You're not going to be around anymore." But in fact, that's not the case. What we are really seeing is that full-time regulated taxis that come insured with trained
Mhm.
drivers are now very valuable to these third parties that want
Yeah.
to utilize that. Let me tell you, you asked the economic question. As Uber shifts more and more of their rides over to third-party taxi fleets, their bottom line in terms of profit is just going to skyrocket.
Yeah.
So I think what we will see is more and more shift over to third party taxis. As long as the service is on par And
Yeah.
as long as the technology integration is one where it's not a difference for the consumer.
Yeah. Well, you sort of talked about the customers of Uber. Maybe there was initial reticence. Oh, do I want a taxi? Right. But really, I think at the end of the day, right, if it's same ETA or better and same price or better, I think, like you said, 99% of customers just want to get from A to B. And so as long as Uber makes that seamless, they don't really care. I mean, I guess one thing too, we've kind of noted in the past, a lot of people actually that do prefer taxi drivers, they find that they're more local to the city, they have more experience. They also, know the city better, right? If you have a lot of out of towners coming into San Francisco and relying on Google Maps and Waze, they may not know, the shortcuts. And, like San Francisco traffic is pretty notoriously horrible. Like if you just follow Google Maps, you could be sitting in red for, 20 minutes when it said it would take you 5 minutes even using the apps, right? So is there a way to actually take advantage of, taxi drivers maybe even being better?
Harry, your questions are so spot on. Let me tell you, one of the things that have happened with this partnership is there are now Uber customers that are requesting a taxi specifically
Mhm.
through this partnership. And the reason why is in San Francisco and other major cities, you have transit only lanes. You
Yeah.
have certain
Mhm.
lanes that only taxis and buses are allowed on, right?
Yeah.
Private
Good
vehicles
point.
are not. In San Francisco, one of the main streets, a main corridor, Market Street, is closed off to private vehicles. Only commercial vehicles like
Mhm.
buses, taxis, and delivery vehicles could be on Market Street. So if taxis can get around faster,
Yeah.
this is the reason now some people are realizing, hey, I would prefer a taxi. I work on Market Street. I need to be dropped off
Yeah.
there and so forth. But a full-time taxi driver that has been driving for a long time knows the city extraordinarily well. And so there's that aspect also. I would also say there's a subset of passengers that really like the safety of a taxi. They
Mhm.
they believe, that there's aspects of taxis that they feel are more regulated. And so there is some that
Well,
prefer
the drivers
taxis
are
on the city.
fingerprinted, right?
Their fingerprint, their background checked, drug tested annually. They can't have any felonies. So there's a kind of a
Well,
rigor
I don't
that
think
is
Uber
still going
drivers
on with
can
taxis.
have felonies either, but there are some, safety requirements, right? That Uber drivers, they basically, you just check and do a selfie check here and there. And so if you are someone who's more safety cautious, right, I think you might want to know, what the drivers are going through. And I guess my last question on this is, do you think that from an operator's perspective, I mean, do you want okay, people are trying it on Uber and they're seeing how great some of your taxis are. Do you kind of want them coming back and booking with the Flywheel platform to get that guaranteed experience? Or are you okay with them booking on Uber because it's 50-50 whether they get a taxi? I imagine you kind of want them back first party, ordering a taxi through your own channels and not Uber's channel, right?
We made the decision that when we partnered with Uber, that we are going to be comfortable with people using Uber and not using Flywheel. They
Mm.
have the worldwide demand. If people want to use the Uber app just as they've been using, but they now have access to Flywheel, we knew that is something that we had to be comfortable with. Interestingly enough, people though that have never been in a taxi that now master taxi, we have seen now folks now download the Flywheel app and use the
Mhm.
Flywheel app directly that experience a good experience with a taxi driver. But
Yeah.
by and large, a lot of the volume of business is coming from Uber and not coming
Yeah.
from Flywheel, and we're cool with that.
Yeah. So you guys worked with Uber pretty closely, pioneered this model a few years ago. And, it sounds like Uber really likes this model. They're sort of, they're adding other taxi partners. I mentioned the Tower and Alto, who I've done interviews with. They've got their W-2 drivers and they do a very similar, if not exactly the same, coalesce supply model. I like that term, right? Where you call for an Uber X and sometimes it'll be a Tower or Alto, or sometimes it'll be a Flywheel. Uber, I think, really benefits from this fragmented fleet partnership. And then now the latest kind of entry, which, when you were describing this is really exactly how their Waymo partnership works in Austin, right? In Austin, if you opt in to AVs, you can only get a Waymo on Uber in Austin. And so there's no Waymo app you can use. If you opt in to AVs on Uber and there's one that's, same ETA or better, same price, they will match you with a Waymo. So it seems like Uber is kind of using this with, I mean, they like this model and they're using it with all different types of supply, right?
And I think that's exactly what Uber has to do. I think
Mhm.
Uber has to basically partner with every supply, as long as there's a service standard and a quality for them to be able to utilize every footprint to service their
Mhm.
customers is really the way to go. And if that model is a better financial model using a third party, let's say, all
Yeah.
the better for Uber, right? So I think this is what Uber is doing. if we're going to go into autonomous vehicles right now, I
Hmm.
think this is a very good situation where a company like Waymo, where originally people were thinking these autonomous vehicles are going to be the next evolution. Bye
Hmm.
bye rideshare, bye bye taxis, everything's going to be autonomous vehicles, right? I think that was the thinking, that was the threat. What we're seeing now is that these autonomous vehicles companies want to partner with the rideshare and taxi footprints, meaning that instead of replacing us, they want us to utilize their technology in terms of servicing our customers.
Yeah.
So a company, let's say for Waymo, might benefit much more greatly by basically saying, hey, taxis, rideshare, use our technology and vehicles for your services. We'll work out some type of, business split of some sort in
Hmm.
terms of fees and or whatever you categorize it. And we are seeing that is how these autonomous vehicle companies are looking to move ahead. Not all of them. We don't know. For
Yeah.
example, the cybercab, Tesla. We don't know if Tesla wants to replace both Uber and
Mhm.
Flywheel, let's say, right? And just want to be them. We don't know. But let me tell you, managing fleets, managing drivers, all those
Yeah.
things are very difficult. So it appears Waymo is more about their model is more about partnering with
Right.
rideshare and taxis and competing. I also want to mention another key thing about autonomous vehicles because we have a lot of Waymos. They're based in San Francisco, and
Yep.
we have the experience in
I
San
think they
Francisco.
just released numbers that there's now 1,000 Waymos in San Francisco.
That's exactly right. And let me tell you, the technology has improved drastically from they first came out. However,
Mhm.
there are some really key challenges that are still there that are very difficult to overcome. So I can say to you right now, I am not threatened by these new technologies to replace drivers still anytime soon. We've heard
Mhm.
it's just around the corner for more than 10 years. It will eventually happen. That technology will become a standard, but it's still, in my opinion, years out. And
Mhm.
what we're seeing now is these companies, we haven't announced it yet, but we're in discussions with one of these big autonomous vehicle companies to partner with them where they're having difficulty servicing disability rides, people
Mhm.
in wheelchairs,
Yeah.
people who can't see well, or people who are blind. You don't have a robot, right, to help someone in a vehicle or help them
Yeah.
out. So
I think
by
this has
partnering
actually
with
been a big criticism of Waymo and other AV companies, is that they can't serve riders with disabilities, right? You literally have a robot, right? So you
yeah,
literally cannot serve it first party. So you
that's
do
right.
need to partner with someone, like a Flywheel that has experience, in a lot of these cities.
That's exactly what's going to happen. So
Mhm.
we haven't announced it yet, but we are partnering with one of the big autonomous vehicle companies to
Mhm.
basically service their disability rides.
Got it.
And that would probably go for a period of time
Do you
until
have
maybe
vehicles in
robots are
your
there.
fleet that are wheelchair accessible vehicles? Is that why,
Yeah,
or?
exactly. So what's great about taxi regulations is that in most cities, a percentage of every taxi has to be wheelchair accessible.
Got it.
So let's say 1 out of 10 taxis and so forth. So in San Francisco, there's already 100 wheelchair accessible taxis that are available. And so you will see Uber referring their disability
Mhm.
customers over to taxis now with this partnership.
Got it.
But I think you will very soon see these
Well,
autonomous
and I
vehicle
think what
companies do
I
the
what I
same.
like about that too is it's an area where, Uber is great at generating demand, right? They're great at hiring any old Joe or Harry off the street. You get in, as long as nothing goes wrong, it'll be a smooth process. If something goes wrong, you're going to have issues. You'll be on your own, like a lot of tech companies. But I think that wheelchair accessible vehicles, scheduled rides, some of these areas where it doesn't quite fit in, Uber has tried to do some of these products, but it doesn't quite fit into the mold, right? So a company like Flywheel or other taxi operators, I think, can really stand out when it comes to, certain areas, right? And, that's one where it's good where, hey, Waymo can't really serve these, Uber can't really serve these. You make yourself, maybe over time, you slowly grow that piece of the business.
Harry, the paratransit and non-emergency medical transportation has been a core service aspect for taxis.
Hmm.
That kept the taxi industry alive during the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
We have a lot of, I would say, contracts and even subsidized programs from cities like
Yeah.
paratransit to serve with the disabled and the elderly communities. So that aspect is still a core aspect of the taxi industry. And although I'm a critic of the taxi industry,
Mhm.
this is one thing that the taxi industry does extraordinarily well, which is servicing the disabled community for by and large.
Yeah. So have you noticed any impact from autonomous vehicles in San Francisco? I mean, you've got a fleet of 400 cars. What are there? There's 1,000 Waymos in the city. They're doing, I think close to 100. I calculated 150,000 trips a week in San Francisco was my calculation for Waymo recently. Have you noticed any impact, positive or negative?
Well, absolutely. There is business going to Waymo that would otherwise go to rideshare or taxi. So there is that
Got
aspect. But there is still so much business with rideshare and taxis that is
it.
really not affected the driver income yet, right? I would also say that it's become somewhat of a tourist attraction in San Francisco, taking
Yeah.
a Waymo, right? Getting to a vehicle with no driver and so forth. So there's that aspect, but there's also the regular users. There's still have to overcome this safety challenge, right? A lot of people are
Mhm.
uncomfortable still getting into a vehicle with nobody in it and
Mhm.
being comfortable in it. But yes, it is in a sense taking demand away, but it's not so much that it's something that I'm worried about here
Got it.
for the moment.
And I kind of imagine, I've always heard from, I think, yourself and others in the taxi industry, there's some riders who prefer taxi drivers over Uber drivers. So I feel like you probably already have, I don't know, 10, 20, 30% of your core customer base that are big fans. And when Waymo comes around, they're going to prefer you even more, right, to a
Yeah.
robo taxi. So I think that might be the other, if I'm thinking about opportunities for Flywheel and the taxi industry more broadly in the, face of this AV, coming attraction. Maybe it's leaning into customers, leaning into, some of these areas like, wheelchair accessible vehicles where you can kind of really stand out.
Harry, just again, a few years ago, coming out of the pandemic, I didn't know if we would still be in business.
Mhm.
I didn't know where the taxi industry would be. Now, with this experience and this partnership with Uber and what we've done, I can confidently say to you and your viewers, the taxi industry actually has a very bright future
Mhm.
because having access to all of this demand with a supply of full-time regulated insured taxis
Yeah.
is really now become very valuable. The most important thing is, are the drivers making more money, right? As long as
Yeah.
the drivers are doing very well, we'll do fine. And Harry, we have all-time high incomes we have never seen before because of this access to all this demand. So I feel very confident in saying that the taxi industry is going to be fine. However, they have to move quickly
Yeah.
because most taxis still in the United States don't have even e-hail capability. They're not partnered with Uber, right?
Do you think that, taxi driver income is going to stay at current levels? You think it's going to increase? You think it's going to decrease? Because I think that's the big fear we hear from Uber drivers is that, hey, Uber and Lyft, are going to add a bunch of robot AV drivers and maybe it'll expand the pie a little bit. But eventually, I mean, the whole point of AVs, right? Get rid of the driver, the fleet will transition. So there might be, more limited opportunities in the future. So I think we're seeing a lot of drivers that are worried about that. And, I think some of the early data we've shared from Gridwise, for example, did show, a 2, 3, 4, 5% decrease in hourly income for drivers in AV cities versus non-AV cities. So, I mean, I think it makes sense, right? More supply, they pay drivers less,
I
human
I
drivers.
think I think that's a worry in the future. Right
Hmm.
now, the way I see it, at the current generation of technology, what we'll see is this collaboration with rideshare and taxi
Got it.
expand everywhere, right? So for the next few years, you'll see more and more taxis servicing Uber demand, and
Hmm.
you will see driver income increase drastically because of that.
Yeah.
So I
That,
can say within the next few years, as this partnership now kind of expands, and that's what we're doing. We're just scaling what we did in San Francisco, like
yeah.
globally, right? And
Got it.
so that aspect is going to create a lot more income for drivers. I'd like to
Yeah.
give you one case study.
Hmm.
We just did a huge deal in Mexico. In Mexico, the World Cup is coming next year. There's a real regulatory push to have credit card capability, to have cameras in the vehicle for safety, all these aspects. And Uber rideshare is not allowed in many parts of Mexico, but
Hmm.
Uber rides are referred over to us. Those are taxi rides. So those
Hmm.
rides would be allowed. So we just did a big deal where we're now going to be
Interesting.
platforming tens of thousands of taxis in Mexico to serve Uber ride demand and to modernize those taxis through Flywheel. So it just gives you an idea. We're very excited
Well,
because the whole industry still has to move in this direction.
yeah, no, I mean, I think tapping into international markets via taxi is very interesting. Lyft acquired Free Now, I think I'm guessing in part for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, regulatory, even just the brand, right? That, Lyft obviously is pretty non-existent abroad, but even Uber, right? They're not the same Uber in the US as they are in Europe and other places, right? From a brand perspective. And that I think is definitely interesting. So it sounds like, when it comes to your fleet, what you're doing, kind of more of a collaboration for now with ride shares and AVs, maybe more competition with AVs in the future. Is that what you see is eventually coming?
I think eventually as AV technology becomes, more and more accepted and the
Yeah.
technology improves to overcome those key challenges, uh, that could be, a future challenge. But as what I think is more likely to happen is you'll see us partnering and you'll actually see autonomous vehicle taxis,
Mm.
right? You'll start. So it's not great for the driver's future, but I think that that technology will be co-opted by both Uber and taxis in their footprints.
Yeah. Well, it's almost ironic that taxis, as you've pointed out, have kind of lagged behind so long when it comes to adopting technology. They've kind of like screwed it up so bad. Now they have this opportunity to actually partner with rideshare and kind of save their butts. And, there's more opportunity from partnering with rideshare than business they'll lose from APs over the next few years, right? If they didn't have this rideshare opportunity, it might be more of a threat. But I think what you're saying is there's so much opportunity to embrace rideshare, Uber or Lyft technology that can kind of outweigh any, kind of increase in from AVs or decrease from AVs in the next few years.
It's very well put, Harry. That's spot on. I
Yeah.
really believe exactly what you said. Just said.
So, kind of last couple questions on the AV side of things. Are you doing anything right now today to prepare for an AV future? I mean, you talked about this partnership with AV company. I mean, that I guess is kind of an obvious hedge for an AV future. Like, what can you do now in your business today that is, 0%? Like, AVs don't matter to you, but in 3 or 5 or 7 years, like, what are some tangible steps you can take to kind of start preparing for that, if anything?
Great question. We're already doing it. So there's two things. As in, we haven't announced it yet again, but
Hmm.
we are already testing that partnership where autonomous vehicles can refer their disability rides over to us to
Got
be
it.
serviced, right? That's number one. Two, there's a big regulatory challenge. Like the partnership with Uber would not have happened without the regulatory
Mhm.
changes that were needed. The taxi industry to this day still have old meters that you don't even know the price of the ride to the end of the trip. That's what
Yeah.
we're dealing with here, right? So for us to basically partner with Uber, bring the rides price as is as an upfront price, those type of things, we had to go through a lot of regulatory changes, and that was a big challenge, but we did it. Same thing now on the autonomous vehicles. There's not even an understanding that taxis may
Mm.
actually use an autonomous vehicle as maybe a medallion taxi, right?
Yeah.
So these rules and regulations have to be updated, and we're on the case, so to speak. We're already trying to work behind the scenes. And say what you will about San Francisco, but San
Mhm.
Francisco is genuinely a bellwether city when it comes to these type of technologies because Uber is based here, Waymo
Yeah.
is based here, Flywheel. So as we kind of modernize the rules and show why these partnership may be very good for all involved, I think you'll see that being adopted throughout the United States. So to answer your question succinctly,
Yeah.
we're already starting to take those steps to prepare for those partnerships.
Are there any, from a product perspective, are there any other category of rides? I mean, the disability, rides for riders with disabilities, I think that's the perfect, one where you can serve like Waymo or any of these AV companies. You guys are the best partner for that. I think that is pretty kind of a slam dunk case. Are there any other categories where you could make that argument? I'm thinking scheduled rides, airport rides, sort of. I think Waymo could eventually get an airport permit. Like, what do you think? Are there other categories of rides where you could dominate and sort of provide that value for AV companies?
That's a great question. I think, quite frankly, every category of ride partnering, utilizing taxis works, right? So
Mm.
any aspect where we can share cost, there's only one set of customers out there, right? So everyone, right? There's one set of customers. So the more that we can leverage all the different channels of service, right, to
Mhm.
those folks is the way to go. But I would say that disability rises and non-emergency medical transportation is really a
Yeah.
core aspect of taxis. I would also say the regular users of taxis that basically commute on a regular basis,
Mm.
those aspects are also very strong. I
Mm.
think also taxis are very good about having contracts with a lot of firms, not just
Mhm.
restaurants and hotels,
Yeah.
but we're talking about law firms, things like this. So those aspects also are very strong. I think what you might also find, which is unusual to say, but you may find soon that our disability rides or rides that go to taxi specifically
Mhm.
may, with our partnership with Uber, allow us to provide those rides to the Uber supply.
Yeah.
So where we're now getting Uber rides in a strange way, I think
Hmm.
you might see some taxi rides also going to Uber's footprint here in the future as well.
Got
I
it.
do want to mention something. You said categories. I want to mention something though that is I see
Well, I'm thinking,
changing.
if you're
Yeah.
competing against AVs at some point in the future, like it seems to me, anything where a rider needs physical help or vigilance or help finding the car or anything where there's like that extra step that maybe technology can't solve or very effectively solve, I feel like that's a, possible advantage.
So I want to tell you what we have just done recently that I think is kind of also changing things for the industry. We just partnered with an AI camera company called Nexar.
Mm.
So Flywheel and Nexar are now partnered with kind of a new generation camera that I tested in my fleet. I'm actually testing them out in my entire fleet. And that camera, for the first time, has really changed kind of the risk management that's out
Mm.
there, meaning that these AI cameras are so good, it's integrated with our software. So it knows the metrics that are happening in that vehicle. So it knows if it's speeding,
Yeah.
accelerating, backing, all the key aspects, that there might be a problem with a future accident if the vehicle is used this way. But what's very interesting is these AI cameras now are really in a realistic way, seeing if the driver is paying attention to the road.
Mhm.
It can now discern if a driver is appropriately looking at a text message, getting an order from their tablet,
Yeah.
or if they're really paying attention to the road. And it alerts fleets very clearly that, hey, these drivers are risky
Yeah.
because of this behavior. We can alter their behavior, or this is not a driver that may be driving. The insurance crisis that is happening right now in
Mhm.
terms of both in taxis and for rideshare, where the prices now have skyrocketed, is a huge problem. The ability to leverage this technology to kind of lower the frequency and severity of accidents will really help in that insurance space. I will also say to you that these type of AI cameras, for the most part, are going to be in every commercial vehicle very soon. That's
Yeah.
how good they are. And I'm very skeptical. I've seen technologies come and
Mhm.
go. Everyone says they have the next technology. It has literally changed my operation where the number of accidents have drastically come down. And
Hmm.
I am not comfortable without putting out a taxi without one of these AI cameras now. So I think that's
Interesting.
something that I think you'll see. I also predict that you're going to see the rideshare companies also maybe push and mandate cameras for those vehicles that are taking rides commercially
Yeah.
from rideshare. I think that's coming down the road.
Definitely. Great insights. No, definitely a big fan of Nexar and their product, and we've covered them a lot. So, kind of I want to kind of ask you one final question that's a little bit more broad, but you've got 20 years of experience and you still look like a young man. You've got 20 years
Oh,
experience in transportation and logistics in San Francisco. What's your sort of overall assessment of Waymo? How have they done, good, bad, entering San Francisco? I mean, they're everywhere, and what's the sort of feedback on the ground from someone like yourself who, sees them and, has all the transportation experience?
this is going to be hard to say because it might be construed wrong, but
Mhm.
I'm a fan of Waymo.
Hmm.
I think they are very skilled, the engineers, and what they've done in terms of really pushing this technology along. I know Waymo engineers, I know Waymo leadership. I'm very impressed with what they've done. And I think though that as much as I say that, there are just so many core challenges for them to actually be able to conquer for me to say to you, oh, Waymo, could be autonomous vehicles in the next few years. That's it. It's all going that way. It is still, in my informed opinion, still years out where it really will take away all the drivers and so forth. But in terms of Waymo, I think they're really one of the leading companies. There's a lot of different autonomous
Yeah.
vehicle companies, but I think Waymo is by far ahead of most of them. I think
Well,
Zoox also now
yeah.
has very good technology, but I think Waymo is still very strong. And you can see companies like Cruise are now gone.
Yeah.
Cruise was, there, and they basically decided we're not going to go in the commercial space anymore with autonomous vehicles. The cost of basically what they need to do is still enormous. So
Yeah.
I have, you know, concerns about how much money it takes to actually get to profitability in that model, but it will eventually come.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and it's something that I mention often. We're at an interesting inflection point where if you just looked at Waymo on its own. Extremely impressive. Great product. People love it. The fleet is growing. They've got 2,500 vehicles. If you look at it from 30,000 feet up, compare them to Uber, they're a tiny fraction. Doing a couple 100,000 trips to Uber's 10, 20 million a week, right? And if you look at them at how fast they're moving, right, compared to the early Uber days, I mean, do you remember how fast Uber was expanding? City by city, tens of thousands,
Oh
hundreds of
yeah.
thousands of drivers. I mean, Waymo only has 2,500 cars, so it's like depending half glass, glass half empty or glass half full, you could say that they're, really dominating, or you could say that, they're moving pretty slow. So I think I really appreciate all of your insights, Hansu, and definitely look forward to hearing more about your big Uber partnership and also the future of taxis, as AVs sort of, continue to grow. So thanks very much. If folks want to learn more about Flywheel and yourself, where can they go? Website, LinkedIn?
Flywheel.com, just any flywheel.com, Flywheel Taxi. You can check out the information. Harry, thank you so much. Always love speaking with you. Love your audience as well. And hopefully some of these responses can give some insight to folks as to what's going on.
Definitely. Thanks, Hansu.
Thanks for watching today's episode of the Rideshare Guy podcast. For more information on today's guest, please check the description. Now, you don't want to miss this interview of the Rideshare Guy podcast, so click here and also make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future ones. See you next time.